The native gave us money. Look at that. But I really like that idea of dismantling the building because of what it means historically. And I think that was visually and metaphorically a very powerful way of approaching the topic. So thank you very much.
I guess to continue on the dismantling train, yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, also for kind of, it makes sense to open with your presentation, mostly also because it kind of contextualizes the building. I also thought it was interesting how well we are trained by the capitalist machine to know what to do in these rituals. Everyone knew what to do with the bidding and speculating, and that also means that we're very much centralizing in a way how we think within these type of rituals in a Western context. And then the question is, how do we dismantle our own training? And I think that might be like, the basis of the dismantling, the question of the building. And then you ask, I think it's interesting, Flavia took it to the discontinuing, but about this notion of the permanent construction. I think in a way capitalism is already doing that for us, because if you think about the way like a city in Amsterdam, the Amsterdam School, the architecture has been built to last for a long time, for forever. And now the speculative way of building is that one must have return on interest or return on this profits. So it means that they build for 20 to 30 years. And I think Dubai or United Arab Emirates has taken to the next level where, things come down after 5 years. So I think across the world there are different forms of how people have taken on the way they finance these type of rethinking what permanent constructions could be. And I mean, there's a lot said already on the colonial past, somehow I wonder also to what extent, specifically, maybe the Dutch more than the British, but equally as much was their investment in how to dismantle the potential of people to have power, to take the colonial regime down. And I think the relationship between the Dutch and Indonesia is a very interesting one, because the deal that the Dutch have made was also like a deal through finances, that the debt that the Indonesian took with the independence was such a high debt that it took them, at the same time, it took them maybe like 15 years to pay majority of the money back before they decided, you know what, we refuse to pay your debts. So in a way, what that means is people tend to focus on, let's say, the Marshall Plan, repaying, affording the Dutch to build the country. But actually Indonesia, the payment plan with the Indonesians, equally as much paid the Dutch to kind of rebuild the Netherlands after the Second World War. So I think, in a way, this geopolitical relation is very much, of course, in this building, and I appreciated that you brought that forward. The only thing I always propose is, how do we centralize those who are colonized? Or maybe not centralized, but how do we bring that forward, their positions? And I think, in a way, that in this performance was quite interesting that they were almost like a footnote. You mentioned them briefly, although in a maybe poetic way, one could also say that they were present in many different ways by you kind of bringing forward elements of the building and the way that could be a potential tool to dismantle kind of this particular violent history. That's what I have to say for now. Thank you.
Because we were a bit late, I would propose that we go forward straight with Sarah. So we just...
It was the search for the voice in our fingers, for a speech that could be touched. It was the search for a feminine epic, feeling the intoxication in our tongues. But assumptions and consequences were confused in an unfaithful way. The economic alteration of letters was not only a historical movement. The consciousness of the word is this purification, this currency based on the minimum sign, this irrepressible economy that the alphabetical writing multiplies and consecrates. This is the V in the alphabetical trap of its letter. What follows is a short draft of a book that I started to write a few months ago. The first edition of the book was written by my partner in 2015. It was titled Sotto il segno di Diana. The book was the result of an area of research that we had in common. I can see how much that text was and is informed by my research on language through a feminist lens, for I recognize Maria Gimbutas and Carla Lonzi in his argument. I can still read that the book was dedicated to me and to his daughter Sofia. Perhaps I am lunatic in thinking that the book belongs to me too, that I'm there in those pages, not just an intuition, but with a whole body of thought. Nevertheless, some months ago, I reread his book and decided to rearrange the composition with new additions, since the critical structure of the subject is based on a feminist position, but undermined by the preservation of contradictory historical constructions. What you're going to hear is a passage that caused me to realize the lack of criticism of certain subjects in an art history. Such a deficiency derives from the fact that art is also an important part of the capital of the country where I was born, Italia. The iconographic apparatus stems from and then builds upon the text by Mauro Zanchi, Sotto il segno di Diana, but its arguments diverge from the original. I will comment on some pictures which glorified the patriarchal history in the Venetian Renaissance. I will comment on the visual hidden elements of a particular collusion. Women fought violently with various weapons in 14th and 17th century Christianity, which came to label her as a witch during the transition from feudalism to capitalism. The aim was the privatization of the bourgeois woman or the transformation of the working class woman for the common good. Hans Baldungrian woodcuts on witchcraft display the influence of a context justified by the Malleus Maleficarum. Aristotele Philide is another xylography of the German painter. This story was an exemplar used in sermons by the Dominican John Harold in the 14th century, warning men of the threatening power of women who had the ability to reduce even the wise Aristotle to a rude animal. He said that man makes the gods while women love them. Hans Baldungrian painted a holy family in which Saint Anne, the mother of God, performs an apotropaic genital manipulation, imposing a knot V on the testicles of the infant Jesus. An inverted or horizontal V-shaped sign is present in some works made by painters from Veneto in the early decades of the 16th century. In this work by Botticelli, it is still executed by a Madonna with child. In most of the works in which the V sign appears, however, the gesture is made by Diana or an infant embodiment of her. It's a pagan gesture. The hypothesis of this research is that it was distinctive of an esoteric or heretical circle, which at first made me think of proto-feminist positions. I now think that my initial association was wrong. It's a sign that seems to refer to the lunar horns of the goddess, and a gesture that inevitably entered into Christian religious subjects, given that since 432 AD, the Council of Ephesus, the city where Diana was venerated, the Church has imposed adoration of the Virgin Mother of God in place of the goddess of the pagans. In the Italian Renaissance, an esoteric world was camouflaged, dispersed in details of private collections. The aristocratic environment opened a secret door to the Diana Society, whose members elaborated social customs of indecent refinement. In 1520, Palma il Vecchio painted Bagno di Diana e le Ninfe, set in a mythological dimension in which the nymph is a force of nature and beauty a myth that emerges from the privatization of the woman. The pictorial motif of Diana was also a pretext for showing female nudes, allowing the possession of things for as long as we look at them. In the foreground of the open-air gynoeceum, Diana directs the scissor-like fingers of her left hand down into the earthly cavity. The relation of the V sign to Artemidea's virginity is confirmed in Benvenuto Cellini's Nympha di Fontainebleau, now in the Louvre. In the bronze high relief, the nymph embraces the head of a deer, while with her left hand she turns her V-shaped fingers into waves of water. The presence of deer, dogs, and water makes her a Diana. The deer is the sacred animal of the goddess, and the scene refers to Ateone, the man who saw the goddess naked, and was therefore transformed into prey to be devoured by her dogs. It is not only Diana who is depicted with lunar horns, but also the god of cosmic harmony. This is evident in the Educazione di Pan, painted by Signorelli. Here the V refers to the horn god, whose worship was only discredited by the emergence of Christianity. In the 14th century, the Church associated Pan and Diana with Satan and his demons, and considered the Sabbath and Nesba of witches, benandanti, and sorcerers to be dangerous pagan rituals. The V sign, then, could be linked to the god Pan in the moment in which the horn god of the old religion is becoming the devil of the new one. Over time, the gesture has been transmitted through initiation, becoming both a sign of belonging to a heretical sect and a gesture of defense against the curse. In this sense, it was used in the Last Judgment of the Princess Portal of Bamberg Cathedral. Here the king, who makes the gesture by pointing the V-shaped fingers of his right hand downwards, is placed among the damned, next to a bishop and a rich man holding a bag full of money, who are all depicted with bitter smiles and imprisoned within the chain, pulled by a demon. The witch hunt becomes a clash between the culture of church and state, and an alternative culture in which the magical is a route to knowledge. During the conflict, the church inculcates terror, which not only goes so far as to kill the women of this culture, but also to import such magic into the living rooms of the princes. In the official church of the early 16th century, there were commissions of artistic works in which magic is personified by Greek-Roman divinities, including Diana. The best known have been translated into paintings by illustrious artists of Manierism. Flora refers both to Flora Primavera, the goddess of flowers and gardens, and to Flora Meretrice, a courtesan of ancient Rome, rehabilitated through deification. The Flora Diana painted by Tiziano in Palma il Vecchio nods to V and bears witness to the figure of the healer, heir to a tradition that used healing herbs and natural magic, and demonized by the Council of Trento. In the aristocratic salons, these subjects show a closeness to the representation of the Amazons, signified by both the V-shaped symbol and the bare breast. L'Amazzone Ferita in the Musei Capitolini is an example of the warrior virgin dedicated to the cult of Diana. One of the interpretations of the etymological Amazon considers the term to mean priestess of the moon, coming from the Caucasian Masa. Here my argument starts to diverge from his text. Mentioning a sect means reading these paintings without excluding the tradition of a sacred prostitution dating back to the Middle Ages. It means admitting that in the Renaissance, there still were Christian sects preaching the community of women, such as those of the first Nicolasiti, Fibioniti, Leviti, and Barboriti. It was a sacred prostitution, but it was also an ecstatic prostitution, in which Christianity and paganism merged in aristocratic palaces. Think of the text, Treaty of Sacred Polygamy, in which mention was made of the lasciviousness of the cardinal's servants and of the cardinals themselves. Ninfa Dormiente is a work that reproposes inner atmospheres and the idealized description of the pastoral world that becomes a model for many lagoon painters. The female nude is here said to represent the desire for a return to nature. The female nude reproduces here also what Carla Lonzi in 1971 called a celebrative moment of male creativity. The woman, as a subsidiary human being, is denied any intervention that implies a recognition of her as a subject. In La ninfa in un paesaggio, the gesture of the inverted V is inserted into a painting in which the female nude becomes a private collector's item. The archaic landscape context seduces Neoplatonists and important private Venetian collectors. For this reason, it's found in various works with mythological, symbolic subjects in which the female nude is represented in languid poses. The woman is conditioned in a category that guarantees a priori to the artist, the protagonist of creativity, the appreciation of his work. Art is institutionalized, and with it a neutral counterpart that witnesses the gestures of others. La Venere di Urbino seems to be a charming courtesan and an affiliate of the circle of the Madonna Oriente, judging by the allusion to V that she makes. In this picture, patriarchal creativity is stimulated by the unarmed acceptance of women. In order not to lose the confidence of a myth, the work of art had to adapt to our exclusively receptive role. In Venezia, meretricio was not considered something dirty or sinful, and didn't affect the idea of belonging to a wealthy guest, even if it was practiced by a noble woman. In fact, it was often precisely this ability that enabled the females of the house to raise families and increase their status. And so many married women rounded off their husband's income for a fee. Out of a population of 140,000 souls, 11,000 were courtesans, and yet only a part of them were honored. A regulation of 1543 made a clear distinction between infamous whores, unworthy of sitting among the faithful, and women of high lineage for whom mercenary love was an art, and who could occupy the first pews in a church. In Dorotea by Sebastiano del Piombo, a woman draws a V caressing a lynx fur. They write that it could be Francesca Ordeaschi, the lover of Agostino Chigi. The V gesture, which at first I interpreted within gender struggle, turned out to be a symptom of class survival. The V sign was also known by a famous 16th century courtesan, Veronica Franco, painted by Tintoretto. Of bourgeois birth, she was the most admired and desired poetess of the lagoon. She would have enjoyed a freedom reserved for few women, at least until, in revenge, she was exposed to witchcraft and sent to jail. Once freed, she fell in love with the painter Federico Contarini, who would soon be accused of sodomy and hung by the testicles in Piazza San Marco. Man's strength is in his identification with culture. Ours is in rejecting it. In the never-ending circle where some goddesses dance with capital, something was there to disappear. What is revealed in the collections of women is the aesthetic of a racial distinction. The Diana goddess is served here by a victim of the conversion of Africa into a European reserve for the commercial hunting of black skins at her disposal. While poor women were associated with Diana and burnt at the stake, private collectors, among which we remember popes, were hanging the sacred symbols of their rebellion on the walls of luxurious palaces. The conservation of these symbols goes hand in hand with a classification of the subhuman. In the De Sfera Codex, the moon is depicted as a young woman who, by the light of a torch, governs navigation. When the culture of luxury was reflected in the luxury of culture, a theoretical model dealing with language was built in complicity with colonial expansion. So, the V of the goddess, the V of the moon, became the V of the violence. The privatized courtesan comes to advocate imperialism. Giuditta Oloferne was a subject that crossed the artistic production of many artists in and after the Renaissance, and probably the most well-known are those painted by Artemisia Gentileschi in the 17th century. In her case, the subject was interpreted as a female desire for revenge against the sexual violence suffered by Agostino Tassi, a painter like her. But I would like to link the Gianeceum painted by Tiziano with the Giuditta Oloferne painted by Andrea Mantegna, Paolo Veronese, and Agostino Carracci. In these three painters, the handmaiden who accompanies Giuditta to kill Oloferne and will help her by hiding Oloferne's head in a bag is a black woman. While Mantegna and Veronese were living and working in the territories of La Serenissima, whose capital was Venezia, Carracci took inspiration by Veronese and somehow copied him. In the three examples, we see a white woman painted next to a black enslaved one. From the Old Testament, we don't have any detail regarding a black handmaiden in the city of Betulia. As such, this is a free interpretation by these painters, who depicted something that they were probably seeing in the reality of their time. Artemisia Gentileschi in the 17th century didn't represent any bag, and in her painting, a white handmaiden is helping Giuditta to kill Oloferne. Tiziano's painting of Laura Dianti, the lover of Alfonso d'Este, shows us the V gesture and the African presence in the Renaissance Mantova. In the 15th and 16th century, Europe ties to Africa, forged during the heyday of the Roman Empire, were renewed. Next to white serfs, black children were particularly popular as servants in the court of Mantova. Isabella d'Este, the wife of Alfonso d'Este, specifically requested bank agents to seek out black children for their court. African servants were used as status symbols. They were dressed in white or brightly colored clothing and bejeweled with gold or pearl earrings, but remained in a position of servitude and inferiority. While Laura Dianti's left hand draws a V, her right hand rests as a sign of protection on the shoulder of the child at her side. Inside a pictorial construction, which is the projection of a male gaze, in which the woman herself is molded according to a protocol and a label whose destiny is the same of that of furnishing accessories, nothing can give the sense of piety more than the image of the benevolence of a white and rich woman who can decide whom to protect, how, and when. The woman is defined here in relation to the man who owns her. The black child is only painted in the presence of the woman. The myths of complementarity and benevolent piety are used here to justify a hierarchy of power. The wave of moralization brought by the Council of Trento no longer made anyone feel secure before the Inquisition. So while the painting of a woman with a black enslaved child shows the collusion of the application of coercive forces that commodifies bodies, the V gesture will no longer be isolated. It will be accompanied by gestures that exemplify Christian charity to ward off the punishments of sin. Here Joanna, Princessa de Portugal, painted by Cristóvão de Moraes in 1551, blesses with her hand the head of one of her servants. It became fashionable for noble women to do charitable deeds towards the most miserable ones. These allowed them, and who owned them, to show themselves closer to the needs of poor people and earn a well-deserved place in heaven. The humanist idea of slavery was built on a perversion of Platonic and Aristotelian idea of slavery. Depending on them, Europeans justified that the uncivilized societies of the Dark Continent had been ordained by nature to be ruled by white civilized men. Slavery in European countries beyond the ancient age saw the persistence of servile forms in the High Middle Ages and a resumption of slavery, especially of Afro-descendants, from the 13th century to the whole of the 15th century. The development of the Atlantic trade never extinguished this phenomenon in Europe, and there is certainly a discomfort in admitting that slavery was permitted in the old continent even beyond the French Revolution, and outside its borders even today. Rereading a context and an aesthetics that do not reveal their secrets is a way for us to take a lot of the credit given to culture.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, it would be good to hear the question once more, because it was kind of an extended one, and I was wondering, what the question proper really was. I mean, in general, I think it would be useful in future presentations to have a question maybe at the beginning on the screen, like we had it in the first presentation, because then this question sort of settles in a little better, I think, and it's possible to respond perhaps in a more precise manner. So, do you have the question?
If I'm correct, it was, can ideology be detached from its precedents? If I'm correct, that was the question?
Yes.
Are you the author? Ah, okay.
From its precedent.
Yeah,
Predecessor.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think the argument seemed to me embedded in a certain tradition of looking at gestures, which, quite obviously made me think of Abby Warburg first, but then maybe more specifically about the book on vernacular gestures in Naples, which is a book by Andrea De Giorgio, published in 1832 with this beautiful title. My Italian is pretty bad, like La mimica degli antichi investigata nel gestire napoletana. So the gesture in Naples and gesture in classical antiquity, where basically the meaning of gestures that are used has been sort of decoded and explained, and such books became later on popular and were kind of reproduced and rewritten and written anew until today practically, and definitely through the 20th century. And I was thinking then, in the very beginning of the presentation, there was a kind of proposition that there would be a relationship between voice and gesture, which I thought was quite strong. So it kind of brought the issue of tactile quality, perhaps preserved in the voice, and in especially, I think, in the sort of performative uses of speech, of which, for instance, the command can be one. Then I was thinking, since this relationship between art and capital was also quite importantly elaborated, it kind of made me think back to an essay in which the circulation of currency is compared to the use of metaphor in philosophical text, which is Jacques Derrida's text called, I think, White Mythology, the metaphor in philosophical text, where basically the circulation of the coin and the subsequent erasure of the face of the coin, so of the symbol, which is a symbol of particular authority, reduces the coin back to the original or to the current value of the ore from which this coin is minted. And that was one possible line, I think, that could be continued, apart from looking more closely at a certain persistence until this day of apotropaic gestures and apotropaic magic, the rituals of that magic, which were preserved precisely in the gestures used daily without us even knowing that was their origin in certain, let's say, apotropaic practices as expressed in particular gestures. And well, I learned a lot from the presentation, which I think is a sort of visual essay, if I may say so, and especially the very tempting and nearly sensational news that the cult of Diana was turned into the cult of Holy Mary in Ephesus, so the very origin of the cult became the place of a violent, let's say, remaking into the kind of Christian mode. And this seems to me connecting to the sort of ceremonies of baptism as something that is deeply violent and has to do with implementation of colonial power. And for instance, it makes me think about certain places and churches across the Central America where in the 16th century mass baptism of the indigenous peoples of, say, Guatemala took place by the missionaries, by the church, for which sort of yard in front of the church that's been walled up and had even like sort of watchtowers in corners was built, and then the people were, the indigenous people were sort of herded in this space, and there was the mass baptism. And that in turn makes me think of yet another very late example from that sort of iconography upon which you touched in the last or in one of the final phases of your presentation, which has to do with this relationship between the white and the black subject, which is a relationship of power. And I think quite interestingly and quite tellingly, this subject is present in a painting which I unfortunately cannot show because I think we have, if we had a live connection to internet, I could quickly look it up, but it's a painting from 1841 by Ludwig Emil Grimm, who was an Assel Hessia, and he was from the same family of Grimms who established, the foundation of German grammar and German dictionary, which is very important because establishment of the foundation of the language allows then to go through the work of sort of unification of various German, let's say, countries of the area into something like unified Germany, but that needs the language. And strangely enough, the relative of the more famous Grimms, who was called Ludwig Emil Grimm, did this painting in 1841, which is called the Baptism of the Moor. It's a baptism of a black person with all paraphernalia of a church and predominantly white or only white sort of setting in which this ceremony that allows this black person access to the black, in this case, German society is taking place. So I would even, go a few steps further from this purely art historical argument, kind of extend perhaps the analysis to contemporary instances of the cases that you've looked at in the presentation. But I think I'm going a little bit beyond the objective of our responses, which was not meant to be in any way addressing the subject matter of your research and presentation through a sort of, even constructive critique. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And thank you, Adam, for your in-depth look at it and your in-depth analysis. One thing that I would like to add to what Adam said is that I saw very big and loud echoes of Silvia Federici here, and I assume that was intention. I don't know. Are you familiar with Caliban and the Witch? Because this seemed to be a research that took her analysis of the birth of capitalism through patriarchy in medieval Europe. And what I thought that you did was bring that to the art, in an art context. I thought that you did, if that was intention or not, you did, Federici, a good one in the sense of expanding some of her arguments with very strong visual elements. And what Adam mentioned about the cult of Diana as well, and the Virgin Mary. And I thought that that was very much related to this kind of feminist theory, and that traces the birth of modern patriarchy in medieval Europe. The only thing that wasn't maybe so clear to me, and maybe it's because it is not clear at all, is whose gestures are those? Are those the gestures of the women that are portrayed, or are those the gestures of the painter who created those portraits? That's what, I don't know if there exists an answer to this question, but that answer to me is what would make the difference between an emancipatory gesture, something that women did as a way of coding a message, if you will, or if the male painters themselves put it there for unknown reasons. And the fact that we don't have an answer to that, to me, it sort of dilutes some of the research, in the sense that answering that would actually give a direction to this research. Either way, the answer won't be interesting. Of course, it doesn't matter whose gesture it is, but ideologically it does matter whose gesture it is, because if it is the women, it is part of an emancipatory project, perhaps. But if it is the male painter's gesture, then it is just some symbolism that could even maybe have Masonic ties. I don't know, I'm just speculating here. But that difference, and maybe that answer doesn't exist, maybe it does in historical texts. This is the first time I'm exposed to this, so I cannot answer. But I thought that you have started something that I believe is super interesting. And if you were interested in taking it further, I think that there is something that could potentially have a very interesting feminist contribution to art history and art theory. And I think that that's super valuable. And yeah, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
I mean, there's a lot said, but indeed, thank you for this offering. Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts, but just to add on to what Flavia said, I think for me that was one of the questions: to whom does this gesture belong? But at the same time, in a way, I mean, I guess the freedom of the artist is to also speculate. So one can also use that as a way of taking a direction in which the research and your project might reroute itself. I saw a lot. I thought one of the things that came into mind was this idea of the female body as a landscape, but also as a kind of a landscape of violence. I was also thinking about these the complexities of let's say white women's emancipatory work and black people's oppression in how that simultaneously happened. I thought that one of the things I noticed was also the formation of taste in Europe, connected perhaps to the medieval, but also to this colonial modernist project. To me, those two words are always somehow connected. I thought about the work of Simon Gikandi, who writes about taste, how through slavery taste was developed, conceptualized, formed in Europe, but he also connects slavery and the medieval period in Europe. And I also thought a lot about this, yeah, indeed, voice in the body, but also the histories of female bodies as property, and that how that is propagated, and somehow, of course, then comes kind of the resilience or the refusal of women, and how how is that brought to life? Is that, you know, maybe through your own feminist lens? Is that something that is speculated? The other thing was fantasy. The whose desire are we? Is it a patriarchal desire to see, you know, these women projected in a particular way, with non-human people present as I would say like maybe like accessories, the way, you know, the same people who are made non-human are accessories now in the do for good work. So for me, there was a lot of connection to us living in the afterlife. So the things that, let's say, as someone who did not grow up in Christianity, a lot of things are for me very Christian in this reality, but also, of course, in the work, how the feminist lens, which feminist lens is used. To me, that was already one of the main questions that came up. I thought it was wonderfully researched. I really thought the voice was soothing, but also could be seen and read as a manipulative voice of like almost manipulating me how to think, how to see, what am I supposed to look at, how am I supposed to make interpretations in this particular moment. So I thought that was also very interesting, a way of using the voice. But to me, it also said a lot about our contemporary life, especially in relation to those who are living precarious lives, the ways class formation and the role of women in that, the role of somehow, it said a lot to me also about like the missionary, collective missionary work done through tourism in particular parts of the world, whether that is in South America, Asia, or Africa. The moment also when the images came in of the children, and I know that has been, of course, very present in various, I would say, painting particular traditions in Italy, but also you have there was I forgot who did the research. But there was, of course, this huge work done around the Moors and their heads. Of course, it's also connected to the presence of these children, and that was present across Europe, of course, but very, very present in Italy. Like I remember being in Florence, and people doing this, having these walks, and then kind of these architectural interpretive routes, and how that was very, perhaps also a question about what is to be in close proximity to Africa, like Italy being like one of the countries that is in Europe the most and the closest, but also in a way for me there were two threads that was very much present, of course, the female body and the particular embodiment of these gestures, and the other one was this question of property, either to be owned or to own. And I was wondering but that's more of a question also to pose back to you, because in a way you ask of us this question of that you in a way yourself, I feel, answered that in the way the work is conceptualized, at least to me, it does not seem to be able, one cannot detach them from each other. But what I wanted to pose back to you was this question of, like, is it possible that these two threads can meet each other much sooner in the work? Is that like, you know, this or is the intention to bringing this question of property in a later stage? That was something I was just thinking about. And then I agree with what also Flavia said about this feminist lens, and then the to whom does this gesture belong? And And for me, it doesn't matter if it's rooted in an academic argument or if it's speculative. I think the speculation is also a joyful thing that one can embark on as an artist.
Thank you.
She said they track us now, they track us now, they track us now, they track us now, they take our data just like that, just like that, just like that, just like that, she said. I don't really know if I'm going to be here or not. If my body is allowed in this space or not. And if I am, if I have to wear a mask while I'm saying this, I know I cannot hug you. I know I cannot kiss you, of course. Of course I would like to, but I won't. I don't know if I want to be here anymore. Somehow I would like to go home, but I don't even know what that means anymore. If it means to shut out the world, if it means to draw borders, if it means that I belong somewhere where you don't, then I don't want to go there. 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 Still I'm homesick. I don't really know if I'm going to be here or not. If my body is allowed in this space or not. And if I am, if I have to wear a mask while I'm saying this, I know I cannot hug you. I know I cannot kiss you, of course. Of course I would like to, but I won't. It is raining when I arrive in Zurich. I get out at the Stadelhofer station and stroll along the lakeside, passing the freshly renovated 16-Platz and the Opera House. I pass the Bellevue and cross the Gäbruck towards the Bürkliplatz. And I stop underneath a big old tree and watch the lake and its clean water and the white swans swimming in it and the white mountains on the horizon. And I observed this postcard landscape. So perfect, so clean, so pretty. And I feel the strong wish to destroy it, to destroy all of that. The perfect picture, the clean surface. I want to scream. This is not a reality. This is not real. I want to blow it all up in the hope that this might expose the pillars all of this is built on, what is not visible, in the hope the picture might crumble, fall apart, and make space for that what is not tidy and suitable and white, since I grew up in this picture. I never quite knew what it was that made me feel so uncomfortable. Only when I left and came back, I realized it wasn't something that was there. It was something that wasn't there. It was the absence and oppression of otherness. What the Swiss call independence really is a denial of accountability. And what the Swiss call neutrality really just means that everything is possible if you have enough money and that we don't care where your money comes from, because money is neutral. And what we think is an innocent tidiness really is fascism. It doesn't show itself in what is in the picture, but in what is removed from it and on what costs. This fascism also is inside of me. It is resonating wherever I go. Sometimes I can see it, but most of the time it's just working in the background, creeping around behind my eyes. And whenever I return to this little paradise that can only exist because of its inaccessibility, but is accessible for me, I feel guilty and angry and I want to destroy it, but only for some days. And then my feelings shift and I forget about all of that again and slide into a comfortable oblivion because it's just so nice. And I swim in the river every day. And I buy food at the Migros. Käseschnitzel und Bifidus-Joghurt und Bio-Gemüse. And my clothes smell like my mom's laundry soap again. And I drink fresh water of the fountains that are everywhere in the streets. And I just enjoy the summer. And spend time with my mom and my family and my friends. Georgina, Billy, Angie, Martina. And I become part of the picture again. Und ich habe vergessen, wie der Weissplatz heisst. Das heißt, es ist eigentlich alles noch gleich. Es hat sich nicht viel verändert. Du hast aufgehört zu studieren und aufgehört zu dealen. Ich mag mich noch erinnern, dass du immer zu spät kommst. Du hast es vergessen. Du bringst mir Hasch mit. Du hast es selber gemacht. In deinem Zimmer schmeckt es nach DMT. Nachdem er gestorben ist, haben wir uns eigentlich nie mehr gesehen. Du hast mich gebraucht und ich bin abgehauen. Jetzt ist es schon lange her. Schon saulang. Du lehnst mir das Velo aus, das du gefunden hast. Es hat eine Platte. Weisst, heute würde ich alles anders machen, aber zurück können wir halt nicht mehr. Der Zug ist abgefahren. Aber es ist ja alles noch gleich, sagst, eine neue Wohnung hast mit deiner Freundin. Sie hat die gleichen Schuhe wie ich, aber es sind halt nicht meine. Wir gehen baden. Auf die Wehrdienstle und in die Litte. Und ich ziehe mein T-Shirt aus und bin oben ohne. Du findest es krass, dass ich jetzt in der Dörfli wohne. Wir sitzen auf der Dachterrasse und schauen über zu der Sternwarte. Und sehen beim Unispital einen Heli starten. Rot, 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 hat er mal zu mir gesagt am Telefon. Wir schauen in den Himmel über Zürich und ich habe vergessen, wieso ich eigentlich weggegangen bin. Ich würde dich jetzt gerne küssen. Ich wünsche, du würdest mich ficken. So wie früher. Ich stelle mir vor, wie du meine Muschi leckst. Schlägst und mir beide Augen schaust. Mit deinen gefährlichen Augen, die einfach nicht anders können, als mich anschauen. Und ich will, dass du mich umtrüllst und deine Hand meine Klitoris wärmt und dein Schwanz und mein Arsch pumpt. Und ich kann einfach loslassen, weil ich weiß, dass du weißt, wie ich es gerne habe. Weil ich weiß, dass du weißt. My mom called me today. She said I should leave my phone at home when I go out. She said they track us now. They track us now. They track us now. They track us now. They take our data just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that. She said. She said if I try to call and she doesn't answer, it might be because she went on a walk, because she went outside, because she's out for a while. She's out for a while. Because she's out for a while. She's out for a while. She's out for a while. She's out for a walk, for grocery shopping or other stuff. And she said I shouldn't worry about her. She said I shouldn't worry about her if she doesn't pick up the phone. Everything was alright. Everything was alright. She said she might just be out for a while because she went outside. Because she's out for a while, 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 and she didn't bring her phone because they track us now, they track us now, they track us now, she said, she said they track us now, they track us now, they take her data just like that, she said. And she said I shouldn't worry about her.
You are. Thank you for the performance. It made me think about something that I believe we even spoke about at some point in the DAI reading group. You know, this text by Douglas Crimp from '87, when he wrote that the AIDS crisis doesn't exist apart from the practices that conceptualize it, represent it, and respond to it. We know AIDS only in and through those practices. This assertion does not contest the existence of viruses, antibodies, infections, or transmission routes. Least of all, does it contest the reality of illness, suffering, and death. What it does contest is the notion that there is an underlying reality of AIDS upon which are constructed the representations or the culture or the politics of AIDS. If we recognize that AIDS exists only in and through these constructions, then hopefully we can also recognize the imperative to know them, analyze them, and wrest control of them. And I wanted to quote Douglas Crimp here now, because as you were walking us through all of these different stages, you know, it seemed that everybody went through these different stages of like denial, paranoia, grief, etc. Like during the months of the COVID crisis, I thought that it would be really interesting to see it from the prism of Douglas Crimp's text, and also like look at the COVID crisis in terms of the responses that it elicits. A friend of mine, Natasha Sadragigian, said that the COVID was a contrast agent, you know, like making everything bubble to the surface. So everything that was meant to remain hidden, you know, was now made visible. And that also reminded me of your comment about like how you love and hate the landscape of your home city, hometown. Is it a city or a town? City or a town? It's a city.
Depends.
Depends. No, and yeah, like it reminded me of what you were trying to articulate about all of this infrastructural violence that is completely imbricated, not only like in the banking system, but also like, you know, like in geopolitical constructions and all the structuring force of what is rendered invisible. I don't know if I'm over time, please, like, if I am, signal. Oh, okay, I'm not over time. No, and also like I thought it was really interesting how you dealt with this question of like intimacy and privacy. I think that also like what the COVID crisis made visible was like the bankruptcy or the collapse of, you know, like this notion of the, you know, like privileged space of bourgeois interiority in a double or in a dual sense, like the dual, you know, like privileged space of bourgeois interiority in like a psychic or spiritual sense, as in you're supposed to have like this inner landscape, you know, very dense and rich, to which you can withdraw and it can nourish you, right? I had a lot of friends that told me, I'm gonna read, I'm gonna write a book, I'm finally gonna read all these novels that I never had the time to devote myself to. And I mean, of course, everybody ends up like watching Netflix and and also like the bankruptcy of the you know, like the bourgeois space in the architectural, or let's say, you know, like in the real material sense, because of course like this fantasy that people can just shelter in place can only be sustained by the very few, right? You know, like by the upper middle classes. And, you know, like most people now that live in like precarious situations, like in rental situations, like in very small, squalid apartments, were, you know, like just literally losing it. Sorry, because otherwise I go on, but I don't want to. Next one.
Yes, I always have to kind of. Oh, I think it's close to the. I have to kind of go. Do we have to move a bit forward because I think I'm behind the speakers? Is it okay now? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. For making a connection between like life, the reality of the pristine Swiss life, and your kind of, in a way, like this emotional roller coaster that one has to go through or goes through in the current situation, but also, I guess, when one returns to a place they've left, where I think when you ask the question, am I going there? It made me think about where is there, and I also thought a lot about like this idea of when one leaves, it leaves also the place in a time capsule. So this question of migration, that one leaves it in a time capsule in their own imagination, and when one returns, it's changed, and you do no longer fit in that change, or that change does not belong to you. I also thought about I spent quite some time the past, like I think 8 years in Zurich, with friends and collaborating with people. And of course, there is this surreal reality where one steps into. And this, at the same time, listening to you, it made me think about, it reminded me so much of life in the Netherlands, because I think there's a lot of similarities in how we are conditioned and collectively obsessed with the norm and normal and efficiency, which is also, one could also see that as a form of violence that we put each other to, and and we're in a way also agents of the state in kind of enforcing, like policing each other. Then I wonder, like, how does one abolish that if one wants to go there, wherever there might be? The other thing was I thought about like the work of Patricia Purchert, the Swiss, who's been writing about this, about colonial Switzerland, and yeah, it might come up almost every time, but I feel because in every form of way, colonialism is somehow with us in the fabric of our clothing, in our genetics, etc. But in this context, I thought it was interesting that you touched on this neutrality and the denial of accountability, because to me, it also ties into, for some people, COVID-19 is their permanent state of life in the rest of the world. So for me, it was like, how does one have some sort of, in a way, just to move aside, in a way, what this situation reminded me of so much was how unprepared and inflexible our reality in the West is, and how we're incapable of maneuvering to the unknown. We're not necessarily capable of factoring the unknown. It's not necessarily part of our collective memory. It's not how we understand society. It's not, the unknown is not considered a form of mind fitness. And I mean with the unknown, that which we do not know. And coming from the other part of me, coming from a society, or at least a culture where the unknown is part of everyday life and is practice, and thinking about the collapse of states, like my family is Somali, there's been an ongoing collapse of states because majority of the people are anarchists. There's an anarchist notion also of what society is, and in Somaliland it functions. The anarchism, I would say, is maybe the only functioning anarchist society in the world. And I'm mentioning this because to me, that society reminds me of what it means to be living in a world where it's a state of emergency. And then when I compare it with the life, even amidst the state of Dutch emergency or the Western emergency, it's still quite luxurious. So how do we, how do we maneuver with that? On one hand, dealing with the unknown, and this particular proposition of your work made me think about that. On one hand, dealing with the unknown and how to not be prepared for the unknown, and on the other hand, what does it mean that the West has, officially joined the rest of the world in basically not knowing what tomorrow looks like, and if you're gonna die today or tomorrow. So I'm still going to think a bit more about, am I going there? So thank you for that open-ended question. And yeah, thanks for the work. So this is a bit my associative thinking.
Yeah, I got a mic. I'd like to maybe begin to begin with to ask a question to the question, yes, which is to be where or to go where, and the question made me think about the word which was made in the what is known as Negev desert, which is now territorially part of Israel, or Al-Nakab, as Palestinian Bedouins call this desert. So in this desert, during the time of the British mandate of Palestine between 1917 and 1948, which ended up with Nakba, there was a word coined that comes from a kind of order or command that was given to the local Bedouin people by the British military, and they would say, "Go there." And, they would try to move people at different occasions, and this word got sort of naturalized into Arabic, but it is only used in this territory as goter. So it's one word, G-O-T-E-R, instead of go there. So this is how a new word was coined. And this word is the title of a series of photographs by Ahlam Shibli, which was made in 2003, I think, which describes living conditions of inhabitants of what are the so-called unrecognized villages in this part of Palestine, the Negev desert, which is basically that Israel constructed settlements to which most of the Bedouin people from that area were resettled, but about half of them, and there is maybe around 100,000 people living there, of Bedouin Palestinians, they are living in villages which are, so to say, unrecognized. So they are lacking basic infrastructure. The villages are often not on the map. They are not part of the, let's say, official map in any other sense. And somewhere there, this word go there or goter is dropped and remained, as a sort of stain mark in the language used in the area. And I thought this was, kind of other way of looking at the idea of going there more as an imperative or maybe even an order that has to do with forced, dislocation of a part of the population for whichever reasons, because of ethnicity, religion, and so forth. So it kind of gains on political significance, this idea of going there, while I think that in your presentation, and this is like this sort of second part of my response, especially how it began with a kind of self-shaming almost for, feeling ambivalent about going back there and being part of the picture, part of an image again. But it kind of brings me to the origins of the word nostalgia, which basically, as I understand, is originally defined in the end of 17th century as a Swiss illness, mal du pays, and this is in the context of, the Swiss were among the best mercenaries in Europe, along with the Hessians in Germany. So the people of Kassel were sent to fight for Venice, and the Swiss were sent to fight in flatlands of France, which was obviously fairly depressing for them coming from the mountainous country. So they developed this sickness that was then called homesickness, nostalgia. And I think looking at the work of, I've been looking at the work of Swiss artists, younger artists, for now good 15 or so years. And what, especially in the beginning, what struck me was how many residencies abroad are offered to young Swiss artists. So each canton has its own system of sending people away to somewhere. But looking at what is happening with these artists is that very often, after a while in, say, New York or Beijing or Cairo and so forth, they return. In most cases, they don't stay. They go back to their country. I didn't do any statistical research on that, but I would bet that most of the people who are sent to, enjoy a residency abroad, in the end they returned. And there's an open question why so, and I think it has to do with too much of a kind of security that is offered on such residency, that in a way you remain sort of encapsulated by the country, by your home country that loves you dearly and wants you to come back at some point with all your experience that you gathered. Thank you.
The roaring 20s are back. Woo! 2020, the gift that keeps on giving. Yes. The one that is going to ruin the whole party vibe. Well, Miss Rona did her job well. Overstayed, and still at the party, at the after party, sniffing the last bag of speed off of others. I miss feeling alive, navigating by improvising, dancing. Such a big part of my life. Planning is for losers who gave in to the neoliberal capitalist promise. The only ethical consumption under capitalism is eating ass. Cruising the unknown, unclear, the in-between, the fluid. The feeling of being alive when you know your body